A clinic review chair must choose whether one outdated assistance preference remains active or disappears together with the accountability trail. Keeping it can misrepresent the person, deleting it can erase useful continuity. The moral problem begins before either command is chosen. Technological memory is often governed as a switch. Keep the record or delete it. Yet storage alone does not determine what the record can do. The first question is what authority the record carries, who may use it, for which purpose, and what treatment it may justify. A record can remain stored while its authority is narrowed, separated, challenged, or allowed to decline. Ethical memory, therefore, has more than two settings. Consider a deliberately hypothetical community clinic workshop, not a description of any real patient support system, medical policy, privacy practice, or legal requirement. The group examines one outdated assistance preference. Deletion would remove continuity, continued active use would preserve an obsolete choice, and broad access would escape its original context. The chair assigns a narrow purpose, a restricted audience, a review transition, a correction path, and a separate accountability copy. The result is neither total retention nor total erasure. Useful continuity survives while the old preference stops automatically defining the person's present needs. Start with purpose. Why does this record exist now? To guide current assistance, document a past decision, or preserve evidence for review. Purpose establishes the record's present role. A stored item has no single moral function. Its permitted purpose determines which actions people may take because of it. Function converts storage into institutional power. When a current preference guides present support, continuity can serve the person. When an obsolete preference governs new situations, continuity can become misrepresentation. Continuity must follow present relevance. Purpose must therefore be revisited when circumstances change. The question is not merely whether the record remains accurate about the past. Historical truth and current authority differ. It is whether the original reason for using that past information still applies to the present decision before the group. Present decisions require present justification. The first payoff is a distinction. Preserving history does not require preserving every authority history once carried. Purpose can end before storage ends. Storage and permission remain separable. Next, ask about audience. Information shared within one support relationship can acquire a different meaning when interpreted by administrators, employers, or unrelated reviewers. Audience changes informational consequences. Context does not travel automatically with a record. A new audience may see the old preference while missing the circumstances that made it reasonable. Missing context changes practical meaning. Audience limits protect contextual integrity by deciding which people may interpret the information and which decisions remain outside its assigned use. Access boundaries preserve contextual roles. This is also a power question. Wider circulation increases the number of people who can act on a record, while the recorded person may remain unable to respond. Circulation multiplies decision-making power. Separating audiences can preserve continuity for the support team, while keeping the same material outside unrelated institutional judgment. Separation contains institutional reach. The second payoff follows. Privacy is not only about existence or secrecy. It is also about preventing one context from silently governing another. Context defines legitimate informational use. Third, examine duration. Time should change authority when the relationship, purpose, or person's circumstances no longer match the record's original role. Time changes the case for authority. Duration is not simply a countdown to deletion. It can trigger review, reduced access, renewed consent, archival separation, or eventual removal. Transitions can precede final deletion. In the clinic scenario, the outdated preference should not keep directing routine assistance merely because the system can still retrieve it. Retrievability does not establish relevance. A meaningful transition asks what has changed: the person's stated preference, the decision context, available alternatives, or an unresolved obligation. Changed conditions demand renewed judgment. Scheduled review makes that transition visible. People must decide whether authority continues instead of letting storage duration make the choice silently. Review interrupts passive policy drift. The third payoff is controlled decay. Authority can narrow in stages while continuity remains available for a justified, Bounded reason decay can preserve bounded continuity. Fourth, require contestability. The person described by a record needs a practical path to challenge its accuracy, meaning relevance and permitted use. Challenge creates procedural standing. Correction matters because a technically preserved past can still be morally misleading when it excludes the person's later explanation or changed circumstances. Later context can correct authority. Contestability also changes institutional power. The reviewer must respond to a challenge rather than treating stored information as self-justifying. Stored information cannot justify itself. A challenge need not erase the original record. It can attach correction, restrict use, trigger review, or replace an outdated active instruction. Correction offers more than erasure. This protects continuity and agency together. The history remains traceable, but the person can influence what present treatment that history authorizes. Agency can coexist with traceability. The fourth payoff is restored standing. Memory becomes less one-sided when the subject can contest how it is interpreted and applied. Standing makes memory less unilateral. Fifth, ask what accountability requires. Some records preserve evidence that another person or the wider institution legitimately needs to review an unresolved action. Evidence can serve relational duties. That value may belong partly to people beyond the recorded subject. Deletion can remove their ability to establish what occurred or whether a duty remains. Some claims depend on shared memory. Accountability still does not justify unrestricted circulation. Evidence can be separated from routine treatment and placed under a narrower review purpose. Purpose limits evidentiary access. In the hypothetical workshop, the accountability copy records how the old preference was used while the active support record reflects the current choice. Operational and oversight roles diverge. Independent review can then examine the process while daily assistance proceeds under the updated preference. Different functions receive different authority. Independence redistributes review authority. The fifth payoff is bounded evidence preserve what answerability needs while preventing oversight material from becoming a permanent source of unrelated judgment. Accountability requires bounded availability. Consider the strongest counterpoint. Simple blanket rules are easier to understand, administer, and audit than a framework requiring several contextual decisions. A short period of broad continuity may also be defensible during a clearly defined transition, when fragmented information would disrupt the hypothetical support process. But simplicity can hide value choices. A single rule still decides whose continuity, dignity, correction, or accountability interest receives priority. The framework also has limits. Purpose can be disputed, audiences can overlap, review can be delayed, and powerful institutions can define categories in their favor. It therefore requires assigned responsibility, visible transitions, and genuine challenge routes. 5 questions do not substitute for accountable people making judgments. A validating case for forgetting is a resolved temporary preference whose continued use would misrepresent the person and serve no remaining oversight purpose. A validating case for retention is an unresolved complaint whose bounded record is still needed for review correction or responsibility assignment. Neither case yields a universal schedule. The framework identifies relevant moral decisions, but verified real-world evidence must determine how any institution applies them. We can now assemble the answer. A defensible memory policy separates purpose, audience, duration, contestability, and accountability instead of asking only keep or delete. Purpose determines why a record may influence action. When that reason ends, its active authority should be reviewed even if historical preservation continues. Audience determines who may interpret the record. Separation can keep one legitimate use available while preventing migration into unrelated decisions. Duration determines when authority changes. Review points and staged decline make memory responsive to changed circumstances rather than merely older. Contestability determines whether the person can challenge accuracy, relevance, context, and use before the record shapes another consequential decision. Accountability determines which evidence others legitimately need. That evidence may deserve bounded preservation even after its routine operational use has ended. Together, the 5 questions produce several outcomes: retain, separate, decay, contest, or forget. Each outcome changes authority, not merely storage. This is a normative framework, not legal, clinical privacy, security, or records management advice. Real application requires current evidence and responsible domain review. The ethical unit of memory is therefore the authority attached to a record, who can use it, why, for how long, against whom, and under what challenge. For an outdated personal preference, the answer may be correction, separation, and declining authority, rather than immediate deletion or unrestricted retention. For an unresolved accountability matter, the answer may be bounded preservation, independent review, and restricted use until the relevant obligation reaches a justified transition. A morally serious policy must explain every grant of memory authority and every withdrawal. The unresolved trade-off is who bears risk when those judgments fail. Machines store records, but people assign their authority and consequences. The machine is learning. The question is, what are we teaching it?